She reached over without saying a word and turned down the volume. The TV had been blaring all evening, news anchors arguing, breaking headlines flashing red, the noise filling every corner of the living room. He didn't even look up when she grabbed the remote. But when the sound faded into a soft hum, she leaned closer and whispered, "Now you can focus on me." That whisper changed everything. Before we begin, if stories like this move you and remind you of the good in people, make sure you subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Here on your channel name, we tell real, heartfelt stories about kindness, second chances, and the quiet moments that change lives. Now let's get into today's story. Mark Reynolds hadn't always been this distant. At 42, he had built a decent life in Columbus, Ohio. A modest brick house in a quiet neighborhood. A steady job as a project manager for a construction company. A wife who still set a plate for him every night, even when dinner went cold. But somewhere between deadlines, layoffs, and endless headlines about everything going wrong in the world, Mark had started to disappear. He didn't leave physically. He still sat on the same couch every evening. He still wore his steel-toe boots through the front door and dropped his keys in the same ceramic bowl by the entryway. But mentally, emotionally, he was somewhere else. The news was always on. If it wasn't the news, it was sports commentary. If it wasn't sports, it was political debates. Noise. Constant noise. It filled the silence he didn't want to face. Emily noticed the change long before Mark did. She saw it in the way he answered with one-word responses. In the way his eyes stayed glued to the screen even when she told him about her day at the elementary school where she taught third grade. In the way he sighed more and laughed less. One evening, she stood in the kitchen doorway watching him. The TV was flashing images of another storm, another crisis, another argument. Mark's jaw was tight. His shoulders were tense. "Dinner's ready," she said softly. "Just a minute," he muttered, not turning around. That minute stretched into 20. They ate in silence that night. The clinking of forks against plates sounded louder than their voices. Emily missed her husband. Not the man sitting 3 feet away, but the one who used to tell terrible dad jokes, who used to dance with her in the kitchen, who used to ask her about her students by name. She wasn't angry. She was worried. A week later, she tried again. "Mark," she said, sitting beside him on the couch, "do you ever feel overwhelmed?" He shrugged. "It's just the world. It's a mess." She nodded slowly. "I know. But you don't have to carry all of it." He didn't respond. The news anchor's voice rose, dramatic and urgent. Mark leaned forward, elbows on his knees. That's when Emily realized something. It wasn't just the noise. It was what the noise was doing to him. It was feeding his fear. His stress. His sense that everything was out of control. And the more out of control he felt, the more tightly he clung to the screen, like maybe if he just watched closely enough, he could prepare for whatever disaster came next. But in the process, he was losing the small, beautiful moments happening right in front of him. The breaking point came on a Thursday night. Mark had just gotten a call from work. A major project was delayed. Costs were rising. His boss had hinted at restructuring if things didn't improve. He hung up the phone, walked into the living room, and turned the TV on louder than usual. Emily was sitting at the dining table, grading papers. She looked up at the sudden blast of sound. "Mark," she called gently, "can you turn that down a little?" He didn't answer. She waited a few seconds, then stood up and walked over. She could see the tension in his face. The way his leg bounced restlessly. Without asking again, she picked up the remote and pressed the volume button. The room grew quiet. Mark turned to her, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Hey, I was watching that." She knelt down in front of him, so he had no choice but to look at her. And then she said it. Now you can focus on me. There was no anger in her voice. No accusation. Just softness. He blinked, confused. What? You've been watching everything that's going wrong out there, she said quietly. But you haven't been looking at what's still right here. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. I miss you, she whispered. I miss us. The words hit harder than any headline ever could. Mark opened his mouth to defend himself, to say he was just trying to stay informed, that he was stressed about work, that he didn't mean to pull away. But none of those excuses mattered in that moment. Because she wasn't attacking him. She was reaching for him. He looked around the room, the warm lamp glow, the family photos on the wall, the half-graded stack of math quizzes on the table. The life they had built together. And he realized he had been physically present but emotionally absent. I didn't know, he said slowly. I know, Emily replied. That's why I'm telling you. They sat there in silence, not the heavy, cold silence of the past few weeks, but a softer one. A space where something honest had just been spoken. For the first time in a long time, Mark turned the TV off completely. That night, they talked. Not about politics. Not about disasters. Not about worst-case scenarios. They talked about her students. About the little boy who finally learned how to read full sentences. About the girl who brought her teacher a dandelion like it was the rarest flower in the world. They talked about Mark's fears at work. About the pressure he felt to provide, to protect, to always be strong. Emily listened without interrupting. Without trying to fix anything. And that simple act, listening, began to loosen the knot in Mark's chest. Over the next few weeks, they made small changes. No TV during dinner. One night a week with no screens at all. Walks around the neighborhood after sunset, where the air felt cooler and conversations felt easier. At first, it was uncomfortable for Mark. The silence felt strange. He'd reach for his phone without thinking. But slowly, he started noticing things he had missed. The way Emily's face lit up when she talked about her classroom. The way the neighbor's dog wagged its tail every time they passed by. The way his own breathing slowed when he wasn't constantly absorbing bad news. One Saturday morning, Emily found him sitting at the kitchen table, not with the remote in his hand, but with a cup of coffee, staring out the window. What are you thinking about? She asked. He smiled faintly. Just, how loud everything was. And how I didn't even realize it. She squeezed his shoulder. He reached for her hand. I'm sorry, he said. For what? For tuning you out. She shook her head. You're here now. That's what matters. Kindness isn't always grand gestures. It's not always heroic acts that make headlines. Sometimes, it's turning down the volume. Sometimes, it's kneeling in front of someone you love and asking them to look at you. Emily could have yelled. She could have complained. She could have withdrawn the way Mark had. Instead, she chose a softer path. She chose to whisper. And that whisper reminded Mark of something powerful, that connection doesn't compete with noise, it requires intention. Months later, Mark's job situation stabilized. The project recovered. The layoffs never came. But even if they had, something more important had already shifted. The TV still turned on sometimes. They still watched football games and the occasional evening news. But it no longer controlled the room. Because now, when the volume crept too high, literally or emotionally, one of them would reach for the remote. And sometimes, with a playful smile, Emily would lean in and say, "Hey. Focus on me." And Mark would. In a world that feels louder than ever, kindness might look like lowering the noise. It might look like choosing conversation over commentary. It might look like reminding someone that they are more important than whatever is flashing across a screen. So tonight, maybe ask yourself, what's filling your room? What's stealing your attention? And who might be waiting quietly for you to look up? If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder to turn down the volume and turn toward love. Because sometimes, the most powerful act of kindness is simply helping someone focus on what truly matters.